Robin Martin, and Cara referred to me as the knowledge expert. I should define by what I mean by knowledge. I've never heard of a speed awareness course until I got involved with TTC. My expertise is not in the driving behaviour background. My expertise is in designing and evaluating implementations and strategies in organisations. So my skill and my background is in evaluation processes. So my input was to try to provide some academic rigour to complement the knowledge based in TTC about the driver awareness courses. You can't actually see this very, very well, but a lot of people contributed to the I don't know anything about speed awareness courses, but even this is beyond my.
Probably it's just the arrow, not the middle, the arrow.
Yeah. Okay, different font sizes down here. And it's not a typo. Cara is actually in the largest font. As an academic, I'm normally quite happy to take credit for other people's hard work, but on this occasion, it would be totally unfair to do that. Cara did all the hard work in putting the questionnaires together, designing it, and collecting the data, inputting into it, and I came in at the end to actually analyse it together with Cara and try to interpret the findings. At the outset, my first question to TTC, well, if you want us to evaluate this course, is there any opportunity for us maybe to change the design of the course to see if different designs of course have different impact? And I believe that was not possible because it's very much set nationally the way it is run. My second question is, well, is there a measure of behaviour that we could actually see whether the course actually impacts directly upon people's behaviour? And I understand that that's not possible to actually do that in a very easy way. So we took the viewpoint, we can't measure behaviour directly. The approach we're going to take, which I'm going to explain a little bit now, is to use a very well-known approach in social psychology, is to look at people's intention to behave. We know from a lot of research and practice that one of the best predictors of people's behaviour is their perceived intention to behave along that way. And it depends in different situations, but the correlation between intention and actual behaviour is very, very high. So could we evaluate people's intentions to not speed in the future? That's our key dependent variable. People's intention not to speed in the future, because we believe from previous research that would be a good predictor of people's actual speeding behaviour. So we decided if we're going to look at that, the best design for us to use would be a longitudinal design, which Cara has outlined, is to measure people's intention not to speed before they come on the course, measure it again with the same group of people after they come on the course, and finally sometime later. Now my role in this process, and I think we've worked very hard to try to achieve this, is try to be as methodologically rigorous as we possibly can to try to eliminate a number of different threats to validity of the conclusions that might come from it that sometimes creep into research quite often. Now one of the threats that quite often come up is what's called history effects. It might be you might get changes in people's attitudes or intentions that occurred irrespective of them being on the training course. It might be that when somebody receives a letter from a police force saying they've been caught speeding and therefore you have the choice to go on a course or not, that itself might start to make people think differently, behave differently in the future, irrespective of whether they've been on the course. So originally we thought around the idea, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could get a comparison group of people? We could also track over time to see whether they change their attitudes, etc. We did look at that, and to Cara's credit, we managed to get some data from people that actually did not agree to go on the courses, but actually methodologically, procedurally, within the time frame we had, it actually wasn't possible to actually run that design, unfortunately. The next best thing we thought we'd do is, if we're going to look at this longitudinally, let's make sure that we give plenty of time to measure these variables to see if the benefits of the course are not just immediate. Because another threat to validity is what's sometimes referred to expectancy. That if you go onto a course and you measure the impact of that course almost immediately, then you get a goodwill effect. So people have been on the course and you measure their attitudes when they finish the course, then people feel, yes, I feel very positive about it. Maybe 2 or 3 days later they start forgetting about it. So much to the, I think, to the credit of the research, and made life very hard for Cara, is that we decided to actually get people at least a week or so before they started the course, at least a week or so after they did the course, and at least about a month or 6 weeks afterwards. It created a lot of work for us, but I think that reduced to some extent, but it doesn't eliminate some of the expectancy effects that might occur than if you measure some of the outcomes immediately after they've done the course. So I was very pleased to be able to do that. So the design was essentially a longitudinal design where we tracked these people over 3 occasions, 1 week beforehand, 1 week or so afterwards, and then about at least a month or 6 weeks after that. The second thing I think is very important to stress is the project was completely independent. It was independent of the trainers. So the trainers, although the trainers knew we were collecting the data, when they were doing their trainers, they would not have known who was actually in the audience participating in the study. And the people in the study were told, please don't tell anybody else in the study that you're taking part in this as well. So it was very independent of them. None of the questionnaires went through TTC, all the questionnaires went through Aston, etc. So we're very pleased that we took those precautions as well. Now I'm going to report the results in 4 different sections. First of all, the evaluation of the speed awareness course. Based upon this key idea, what we want to do is look at, does the speed awareness course essentially improve people's intention not to speed in the future? As the idea is that's a good proxy of their actual behavior. So that's our sort of main issue we're going to be looking at. We're then going to be looking at some boundary conditions. Were there any major gender differences or age differences, etc. in the data? We're going to talk a bit about that. And then we're going to report some of the data looking at the client evaluations of the course. Now the overall model we applied is the model which is used a lot in psychology, social psychology, predictive behaviour. It's a very, very well-known model in my area. It's very, very successful. People have used it a lot in health-related things, like you're looking at people reducing smoking, looking at people using AIDS information, use of condoms, use of health screening, etc. It's actually, in this form, it's actually a very, very simple model. We know that behavioural intentions predict behaviour. So applying this to our situations, what we suspect is if people intend not to speed, they're more likely not to speed in the future. And unfortunately, we couldn't establish that link because we can't actually measure that behaviour within this type of sample. But it's predicted by 3 groups of variables, and each of these variables have different components. First is the attitude. What's very important in predicting people's attention is people think that it's a good thing to do. So do I think it's a positive thing not to speed? And you might think that that's fairly obvious that people would think that. In fact, there's a huge amount of variability in the data of that. There were some people that actually didn't think it was a good thing not to speed. So there's a lot of variation in the data on variables like this. The second thing which actually came out to be very, very important in this context, and I've seen it come out in other research, is what we call the subjective norm. To what extent do you think other people like you behave in that way? So if you do this with, say, teenagers and smoking behavior, one of the best predictors of teenagers' intention to reduce smoking is not parental attitudes towards smoking or parental norms, it's actually norms of their friends. If they believe that their friends think it's a good idea not to smoke, and they believe that their friends are not likely to smoke themselves, they're more likely to have intention. So it's the group which is important to you. They're what we call the subjective norms. And something that came out very nicely as well in the research I'm going to report is their perceived behaviour control, the extent to which people can feel they can control their behaviour. Because one of the things I'm going to be talking about later on in the results is what we found is that people felt that the reason why they're doing their course was something external. There was a reason that determined them being caught out, then they're less likely to have the intention to behave properly in the future. So that's the general model which guided a lot of our research, and we measured all these different components with questionnaire items which have been used in other contexts, and we were quite careful in the ones we used and the way we analysed the data. I'll explain on that a little bit more about in the future. So these are some of the items in a bit more detail. So the first one was attitude to speeding. So we asked them the extent they have positive attitudes to keep within the speeding, whether they think it's beneficial, positive, good, favourable. So we had items saying, do you think it's a good thing not to speed? So we had several items on that. We had questionnaire items which looked at the extent to which they felt they could keep within the speed limit, the extent to which they think they could control their driving in different situations and therefore not overspeed inappropriately. So the control beliefs, the behavioural intentions, and there were these different types of norms down here. I won't go through them in a lot of detail. You can read them yourself if you've got notes there. But I wanted to point to one which came out very predictive, was descriptive norm. The extent to which people who are important to you keep within the speed limit. And it's very important that we keep references to people important to you. So go back to the model. What we were predicting is that people's intention not to speed would be predicted by their attitude, not speed, whether they think it's a positive or negative thing, whether they think people like them would not speed themselves, so their cohorts, their reference group, and the extent to which they believe they have control over their behavior. Okay, so let me just talk a little bit about the data. Now, I don't want to turn this into a methodology class, but I might, just for 5 minutes, because it does demonstrate something very important we were very careful about in our analysis. Cara rightly reported that what we did is we had different groups of people. We had some people who we collected data on 3 different occasions. So the top line is a group of people who completed the survey a week or so beforehand, a week or so afterwards, and about a month afterwards. So about 66 people who did that. Because we get dropout rates, not everybody does what you expect them to do or you hope them to do. Some people didn't complete all the questionnaires. So we had some people that only completed it twice, and we had some people that only completed the first one, didn't complete the second one, but completed the third one. Not many people. Now this demonstrates a very important methodological point, which is very much underestimated in evaluation research with designs like this. If you don't have a control group, you can't eliminate this variable. And it's called instrumentation effect. That if you ask somebody before they've done a course, do you think it's a good thing not to speed? Do you have much control over speeding? You're actually making them think about things they might not have thought of beforehand, and it starts to affect their attitudes and their behavior. Do you see where I'm coming from? So all the questions we ask at pre-test, in a sense, is changing the way they're thinking about the issues. Because remember, at pre-test we ask them, do you think it's a good idea not to speed? Do you have any control over your speeding behavior? What's your intentions about speeding in the future? The mere fact that you ask them those issues, we actually know from experience, starts to make people think in a different way and might make them react to the course material in a different way. The only way you can eliminate that is by having a research design where you have some people where you collect the data only after the course. They've never done the pre-test. And what you're looking for is there to be no difference amongst these people here, and critically, no difference amongst these people here, this group and these 2 groups here. This is very, very important because, as I indicated, one of the problems you have in a longitudinal design where you're asking the same questions over and over again is you're getting people sometimes to think about some of the issues in ways they've never thought of before, and it can affect their responses. Right, let me give you one example. In the original scale, attitude to speeding is a very key variable to us. This was questions asking them, to what extent do you think it's a good or bad thing not to speed? So we want them to score high on this. So have a positive attitude not to speed. If you look at the top line, it would be very easy to take the conclusion that the course had a positive effect, because this is actually statistically reliable effect. Although the differences are small, because of the same people at each time period, they are statistically reliable, and we did do statistical testing of this. So if you look at the top line, it would be very easy to deduce that in fact, the people, as a result of the speed awareness courses, their attitude not to speed increased, and very nicely, it stayed high a month later. So it'd be very easy to deduce from that that the course had a positive benefit. But look down here, the people who never did time one. So we match this, and we control for demographic differences between the different samples. The people that never did the questionnaires scored the same as pre-test. Can you see this effect here? What we're doing here is the people scored 2.1 there. This is different to that. And because we had that, it shows that in some of the measures we had instrumentality, you're getting some changes due to the fact that they're answering the same question on a number of occasions rather than underlying change in their attitudes. Now, this is a real problem in research. Of the items I looked at in the questionnaire, we had to reject well over 1/3 of items. And those items tend to be ones which are very value laden. So we took those items out and we recalculated this scale, and very nice, and particularly for TTC, there still was a positive benefit of the speed awareness course. I'm sorry to take you in that little divergence, because I really wanted to emphasize to you we've done everything reasonably practically possible within this research design to eliminate as many biases as we can. No study eliminates all biases, but we're fairly confident the results I'm going to reply now are not necessarily due to instrumentation, because we took those items out. So these were items that stood the test of time. So the score here was the same as the score down there, showing that it wasn't just due to pre-testing effects. Now again, the take-home message here, in all our results, the size of the effect is very, very small. The differences in the means are not big, but they are statistically reliable, and in many cases to a very high level, showing that as a result of the speed awareness courses, people improve their attitude towards not speeding, and it remains high even a month or so later. And I've said this quite often, and I've been quite open about this. For a course that lasts 4 or 5 hours, it is quite remarkable that we are getting some very strong, reliable improvements in attitudes, not only a week or so afterwards, but even a month or so afterwards as well. So I think it's a really strong indication of the benefits of the speed awareness course on improving people's attitudes. When we've taken away all the other biases that might inflate the effect. If we left all the, by the way, if we left all the other scores in, this actually looks a lot more impressive. We've actually taken those biases out to have a much more, I think, genuine idea of what's going on. Behavioural intentions to not speed. This is our critical variable. This is a group of items that measured the extent to which you intend not to speed in the future. Again, a very nice effect. Again, it's not a huge effect. I think you're going from -3 to +3 on this scale. But again, there is an improvement. As a result of the speed awareness course, there is an improvement post-test 1 going on to post-test 2. Now, there were 2 groups of people in this. There were some people that scored very, very high at the beginning. And there's a group of people that seem to want to do these courses because they don't want to get points on their license and things like that, or for many other reasons, and they have very high behavioural intentions. If you take those people out, so there's some people scoring 3 all the way along. If you take those people out, the effect is very dramatic. And the effect is most dramatic for those people that score around the midpoint. For those people that were scoring -3, below the midpoint, there wasn't a lot of improvement those people. It was those people that were moderately level of behavioural intention showed the biggest improvement. But still, overall, very nice. We're showing some very strong, reliable effects, showing that as a result of the speed awareness course, we are getting improvements in their intention not to speed. One thing that I found was very interesting, there was very little difference on perceived behavioural control, the extent to which they feel they could control their speeding. It had no difference across the 3 time periods, and we looked at this quite closely to see if it occurred on any of the items. It doesn't. I think the reason for this is because it was very high to begin with. People were scoring towards the limit of the scale on this, so there wasn't an increase in perceived behavioural control. Here are some of the boundary conditions affecting it. These are just straightforward correlations on differences between age and gender. So the older the people were, the higher was their behavioural intentions and their attitudes towards speeding. It came out another measure as well. And gender, females. Generally, older females scored much more positively on many of the variables. Younger males scored much lower on many of the variables. The amount of miles they drove every year had no impact. The amount of penalty points they had did have some impact. So the more penalty points they had, the lower was their behavioural intentions and the lower was their attitude. We also looked at the speed at which they were caught at and the speed limit applied at the time. It didn't seem to have much consistent impact upon the data. So generally, overall, age and gender didn't have a great impact on it. It just seemed that older females responded more positively compared to younger males, which I think is something that I don't think anybody would be surprised about that. So, and last, one thing we were particularly interested on was there any transfer of the knowledge gained on the course to other people? We thought that would be a very important thing to look at. So we did ask them, do you discuss the course content with others? We asked them, I think, 3 different things: family, friends, etc. We collapsed across it. And indeed there is. There's a very large percentage of people that go on these courses that actually discuss the content of the course and what they've done on the course with those around, showing there's some spread of knowledge amongst their cohort, which I think is a very positive thing to do. So for looking at these results, we actually found what we set out to try to test. Does the speed awareness course impact upon people's attitudes? Yes, it does. Does it impact upon their behavioural intentions? Yes, it does. Does it have a longer term impact? It's not just immediate. Well, longer term meaning, you know, a month to 6 weeks. Yes, it does. It's just not an immediate effect. But it didn't affect their perceived behavioural control, which I was a little bit surprised, but it might have been because that was very high to begin with. Next thing we want to do is, does the model actually predict intention to not speed? If you don't like looking at numbers, look away now, because I'm going to present the numbers of the model. The model predicts that people's intention not to speed is predicted by their attitude, their norms, and their perceived behavioural control. Now these are the numbers. I'm sorry, it's a bit unfortunate. Ian, you're in the way, sorry about that, because there are numbers down here as well. To cut a long story short, to test the model, we control for age, gender, penalty points, and mileage. And then we entered into our model all the different parts of it. And although you can't see it there, you can see it on the thing. The model actually, at pre-test, is very well supported. Now this was very important to us, because one of the things we wanted to do in this research project is not only evaluate it against the key criteria of intention not to speed, but try to look at some of the processes that might contribute towards that. Because if we can understand some of the processes that contribute towards intention, that should help us much more in the future understanding strategies to try to improve people's intention not to speed in the future. And we find when we look at pre-test the speed awareness courses, all the variables in the model actually nicely predict intention. So intention comes to all three. If you look at over time, so if you look at people at post-test, a month or so after the course, then behavioural intentions pre-test predicts it very strongly. This is what you find over and over again. So people's initial intention to behave, not to speed, predicts future intention. Many of the aspects do predict it, but the one that comes out most is descriptive norm. That's what I highlighted earlier on. And this comes up consistently in the behaviour. What it seems to be very important in guiding people's intention not to speed is their beliefs that people like them will not speed as well. And this is what we're finding a lot in applications of these models, is that people's behaviour quite often are more governed by the norms of their significant group rather than necessary attitudes and information they have about it. So things like teenage smoking, young people's use of condoms, health screening amongst many people, very much guided by their perceptions of how people like them should behave. And if you have any teenage children, then you understand this principle very, very much. Whatever their parents say is the opposite, whatever their friends say goes. Some boundary conditions, again, these are kind of like correlations. I know I'm going through this very, very quickly. But there was some in terms of behavioural intention and attitudes. But what I thought was very interesting was police waste their time enforcing speed limits. So you might like to focus on that. At pre-test, it did predict behavioural intention and attitudes negatively. So the more people thought the police waste their time, then there was less behavioural intention and less attitude. And that's very important because it has some implications for something that comes later. But that effect disappears after the course. And indeed, what we found on those items is people's perceptions of the role of the police and, if you like, the law enforcing strategy improved considerably as a result of doing the course. I think people probably come onto the course thinking, I'm only here instead of getting my 3 points, but as a result of doing the course, they probably think, well, I'm learning something useful and new, and now I see the point of doing it. So we found that quite consistently, that people's attitudes towards the police and the role of the speed awareness course in their driving behaviour increased positively very much. Felt annoyed to get received didn't have much effect. Get my points, that was very much there. Not learning anything new, that didn't have an effect. I felt ashamed when I got the ticket. That actually was a very strong correlation. That the more people felt ashamed about getting the points, the more sometimes the benefits were of doing it. And that very much correlated with gender and age. So older people, and particularly female people, felt more ashamed of the situation than younger males did. So I thought that was quite an interesting finding as well. There's a nice thing, I think, there about the police there. One of the things that came out very much in research, we looked at quite a lot, that taps into some of the stuff I've talked about already, is that there seemed to be a group of people that externalized the cause for them being there. That they would say things like, the reason I got the speeding offence was because I was just going with the flow of the traffic. I did not know the speed limit of the road, or it wasn't clearly identified. Or the person behind me was tailgating and pushing me. And we looked at these groups of people, and for these groups of people, the cause had very, very little impact. There was very little change in their behavioural intentions. And I think that's very, very important, because I think it sets up a mindset that sometimes people come with a mindset, I shouldn't be here, I've not done anything wrong, I was just unlucky, it wasn't my fault, somebody else pushed me into this situation. And are therefore not engaging with the cause, and therefore not responding to the content of the cause and showing the benefits of that. And there was a group, there wasn't a very large group of people, I think of the 66 people we had longer term, there was about 10 people, so 1/6, that scored virtually 1 on all the questions on this. So they're extreme, showed no difference in their behavioural intentions or their attitudes throughout the course. So that was a very interesting thing. I think that's some practical implications in terms of the way people perceive the situation. So there we are, the number of people who externalized it. There was quite a few people agree, and particularly people down here strongly agree, had very little positive benefits of doing the course. So maybe it sets up a barrier in their mind. Well, it wasn't strongly related to age and gender, but to be honest with you, we had such a small sample, I don't want to make too much of that. It strongly relates to attitude to speeding and intentions. So those people that externalize the reason for their speeding have low behavioural intention and low attitudes towards it. For those high believe external factors cause speeding, the model didn't apply at all. You saw very little changes in their behavioural intention and attitudes over time. Finally, some client evaluation of the speed awareness course. Some very favourable results, showing some very, very strong and consistently strong course evaluations that in terms of enjoyed, useful and relevant information very high. But I thought it was very interesting, would reattend if necessary. I'm sorry I can't see down here, you probably have a better view of me. I think it was something like probably, well, it must be well over 80% of people said that yes, they would reattend if they had to in the future and would see the benefit of doing so. And couple that with the high percentage of people that are sharing their experiences on the course with their family and friends and cohorts, then obviously they're probably passing on very good messages for people in the future that if they are asked to come on one of these courses. Okay, that's the model. I've only presented you a very simplistic form of the model. If we were to go forward again, we could look at much more individual social factors behind it. And I think I just want to end on one or two key issues, conscious of the time. This actually comes from one of my lectures. In the world of training, we're becoming much more aware that information on its own has relatively low impact on people changing their behavior. So studies done in communities at risk of AIDS, for example, simply providing them leaflets of information has actually had very little impact on changing their behavior. Smoking behavior is a very good one. We know historically people's understanding of the dangers of smoking is much higher now than it was before. But people's ability to quit smoking is not necessarily based just upon the information, but it's based upon changing their attitudes and their norms, etc. Now this is very important because I think what's been very important is that the course occurs within a group social dynamic. It's not just passing out information. It's sitting around a room looking at other people and saying, I'm not a demon, I'm not the only person that's been caught speeding, there are other ordinary people being caught speeding. So it's the interaction between the trainers, the information, and the people within the group that creates the changes in attitudes and behaviours and their norms, etc. I think that's very, very much what is going on here. So to do with the information contained in the course, the retention of knowledge, and it's essentially changing the mental models. You don't change people's mental models by just providing them a piece of paper saying, don't speed in the future. We change people's mental models by challenging their views within the social dynamics that occur within these courses. And in my experience, the impact we've shown, remember we've done everything we possibly can to negate the effect. We've taken away all the biases we can, we've controlled as much as we can. I personally believe that to find these positive effects of a course like this is, in my opinion, very impressive. It's breaking the economy exchange. The course, instead of 3 points, there's some evidence that some people are coming on with the mental model, I'm really only here because I don't want 3 points. I'm going to just sit through it and I'll grin and bear it. Changing norms of behaviour, especially from significant others. Whether it would be better to have groups of people who are just from one cohort or not, I'm not sure. That's a research question. It might be looking around the room and seeing different genders, different ages, different groups of people, and thinking, well, I'm not alone with this. If I sat in a room with just people like me, I think, well, I'm just like everybody else. But it's that challenging people's norms of behaviour. Increasing their perceived control of behaviour. We didn't see much of that, but in this course, in terms of the average scores, of course there were differences between people, but that I think is very important. And linking the behaviour to internal and not to external factors. We begin to get the impression that there are some groups of people that it's very easy to blame the world for your problems, and you can blame somebody else for why you got your speeding points. And that therefore becomes a barrier for them internalising the information given to them. So just to summarise very quickly some of the things we found. We found the benefits of speed awareness course on the attitude to speeding and intention. And I think that's very, very positive. And I congratulate, I should have said at the beginning, I congratulate TTC for involving us in the project, because the remit of the project was it will be independent and we will report what we find. And we've done everything not to find it. We've taken away all the biases, and we still find it. And other researchers found it as well. Is that this speed awareness course does improve people's attitude. It's small, it's reliable, and it's relatively long-term. You find it long-term within 4 to 6 weeks of them doing the course. It improves their intention not to speed, and we think that's a very reliable proxy of actual behaviour, but we did find it on perceived control. The course material is shared with others, and since most people, 80% of people saying, yes, I would do it again if asked to, we therefore can believe that what they're sharing with others is a positive message, so it's spreading out. That's very good. Benefits observed immediate and post the speed awareness course. So we've seen some longer-term benefits as well. The variables of the model predict speeding. Intention, I think, is very important because we get an idea that attitudes, norms of behaviour, and perceived behaviour control are predicting intention. That gives us a much more understanding of the psychological processes. Particularly descriptive norms is very, very important. It's people's conceptualization of what other people do like them. And that guides a lot of the way people interpret the world. Norms are important, others could be a barrier to delivery success. Boundary conditions, well, one of the advantages, I think, of our study is that we were very focused on controlling for a lot of biases. So the sample size was not huge. And so we can't look at a lot of boundary conditions. There wasn't a lot to do with gender and age, and some of the variables that came out, some of the variables it didn't, but certainly older females and younger males showed some of the biggest differences in the scores, in the sense that younger males were much more variable in terms of the benefits to them. Speed limit of offensive and impairment points may be important, we just didn't find it in this sample. I just don't think we had enough people to really look at that. But what did come out was the blame for external factors. The more people could explain external factors at pretest, we measured the pretest, remember, for the reason they're being there, will seem to be a barrier for the uptake of the knowledge. The client evaluation of the speed awareness course, the majority of clients gave very positive reports of the speed awareness course. Most of them would reattend if necessary. One thing we did do, real shame, Cara spent so long designing a measure of knowledge retention. We actually asked them at the final to ask them to remember some of the details of it. Unfortunately, there was such a huge variability of people doing that, we were unable to analyse it. But maybe in the future it'd be useful to do some sort of test of the material of that. There's a quote I've written there, which I've copied for you. I make no claims that one study answers all or even many of the questions in this area. These are answered by many different types of studies. We focus on one very specific issue, trying to control methodologically. The last thing I'd like to say before Des gets up is that the approach we've taken was to design an evaluation strategy that can be used and applied to many different situations. It could be used for drink driving, it could be used for any intervention that we've used. We've applied it to speed awareness courses, but the principles, the methodology and the strategy could actually be applied to any of the different types of interventions that you're looking at.